There was no single day when the old world ended, no final curtain, no last, definitive pistol shot, no border post marking the frontier between peace and catastrophe. Instead, there was a season. A long, golden, and perfectly ordinary summer. A summer where the skies over Europe were clear, the harvests promised to be plentiful, and the future stretched ahead in a straight, predictable line. It was a summer of picnics and parasols, of riverboat excursions and newly published poetry, of technological marvels at world fairs and confident stock prices in the financial pages. It was the summer of 1914, and it was the last summer of everything that came before. To understand the Great War, not just the battles, but the great, sucking void it left in the human story, you must first understand the world it destroyed. You must feel its texture, breathe its air, and witness the breathtaking height of the tower it had built. Just before it leaned and cracked and fell, the world of 1914 was a world built like a clock, a magnificent, intricate, and overwhelmingly confident clock. Its gears were made of forged steel and imperial will. Its mainspring was wound tight with the promise of perpetual progress. It ticked with the steady, reassuring rhythm of the railway timetable and the quarterly dividend. It was a civilization that had looked into the Newtonian universe, seen a machine of sublime order, and decided to build its own reflection here on Earth. This was the cult of the final afternoon, the Belle Epoque, the Gilded Age. Its faith was not in gods, but in gradients. Everything was getting better. Every year, life was longer, cities were brighter, machines were faster, knowledge was greater. Science was peeling back the mysteries of the universe, one law of thermodynamics at a time. Medicine was conquering ancient plagues. Democracy, it was thought, was slowly but inevitably spreading its civilizing light. You could see this faith made manifest in stone and wire, in the Eiffel Tower, a defiant iron exclamation mark pointing toward a rational future. In the transatlantic telegraph cables, humming with messages that annihilated oceanic distance. In the labyrinthine corridors of power in Westminster, Berlin, and the Quai d'Orsay, where men in tailored frock coats moved leather-bound dossiers and believed they could manage destiny itself. This was a world that had banished chaos, or so it believed. But a clock is a fragile thing. And inside this magnificent, ticking edifice, a different sound was beginning to echo. A low, dissonant hum. The sound of strain, for this unprecedented peace and prosperity was not a natural state. It was a byproduct of empire. An empire is not a static condition, it is a voracious appetite. The map of the world in 1914 was a riot of colour, great swathes of British pink, French blue, German grey, Belgian yellow, each hue representing not just land, but resources, markets, and, most crucially, national prestige. The Earth by 1914 had run out of blank spaces. There were no new continents to discover, no vast, unclaimed territories to partition. The imperial machine, which required constant new fuel, began to cannibalize itself. It began to eye the colonies of its rivals. It began to measure the width of its neighbor's fence. This competition took on a pseudo-scientific, terrifyingly inevitable logic, social Darwinism. Nations, the theory went, were like species in a permanent struggle for survival. The strong would flourish, the weak would be subsumed. Peace was not the ideal, it was merely a pause in the eternal contest. To be pacifist was to be degenerate. To stand still was to court national death. This thinking militarized not just armies, but the entire culture. It seeped into school textbooks, where history became a chronicle of martial glory. It infused popular novels and boys' weeklies, where war was a clean, honorable adventure. It shaped the rhetoric of politicians who spoke of a place in the sun, or national vitality with the gravity of biological necessity. The public mind was being prepared, not for the reality of war, but for its romance. And then there were the wires, a vast, invisible web of treaties, alliances, and military pledges stretched across the continent, connecting every capital to every other. The Triple Entente, France, Russia, Great Britain. The Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy. It was a system designed for stability. A complex mutual guarantee meant to deter aggression through the promise of overwhelming retaliation. But it had a fatal flaw. It turned local disputes into continental automaticities. It removed human hesitation from the equation. It was a doomsday machine disguised as a safety net. The most dangerous part of this machine was not a treaty, but a plan. A single, brilliant and monstrous document locked in a safe in Berlin, the Schlieffen Plan, conceived by Count Alfred von Schlieffen. It was a work of logistical genius and strategic madness. Its premise was simple: Germany could not win a long, two-front war against France in the west and Russia in the east. Therefore, it must win a short one. It must knock France out in a lightning campaign of 6 weeks, the estimated time it would take for Russia's vast, lumbering army to mobilize and then turn east to meet the Slavic steamroller. The plan was a thing of breathtaking complexity. It choreographed the movement of 1.8 million men and 500,000 horses with the precision of a ballet. Every railway timetable, every ammunition dump, every core line of march was calculated to the hour. It was a masterpiece. And it was a prison. The Schlieffen Plan was so detailed, so all-encompassing, that it left no room for error, for diplomacy, for last-minute change. Once the first mobilization order was given, the gears had to engage. The plan dictated policy. Politicians no longer dictated the plan. Strategy had become an autonomous force, a runaway software program installed in the mainframe of the German state. The tail was now thrashing the dog. All it needed was a spark. And the spark came from the most volatile, decaying part of the European order, the Balkans, a region the aged Austro-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph warily called a nest of vipers. On June 28, 1914, in the sun-dappled streets of Sarajevo, the heir to the Habsburg throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie were shot dead by a teenage Bosnian Serb nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. The assassination was not the cause of the war. It was the catalyst. The chemical reagent dropped into a beaker already full of volatile compounds. What followed was a month-long diplomatic minuet performed at the edge of a cliff. The July crisis. It was a spectacle of tragic, almost Shakespearean inevitability. Austria-Hungary, enraged and seeing a chance to finally crush Serbian nationalism, secured a blank check of unconditional support from its ally Germany. It then issued an ultimatum to Serbia, so severe it was designed to be rejected. Serbia, backed by its Slavic protector, Russia, accepted most points but balked at a key clause. Austria-Hungary declared it insufficient and prepared for war. Russia, to deter Austria, began to mobilize its armies. Germany, seeing Russian mobilization as the trigger for the Schlieffen Plan, demanded Russia stand down. Russia refused. The clockwork began to move. On August 1, Germany declared war on Russia. On August 3, Germany declared war on France and, to enact the great swinging door of the Schlieffen Plan, invaded neutral Belgium. On August 4, Britain, bound by treaty to protect Belgian neutrality and terrified of a German-dominated continent, declared war on Germany. In just over a week, the web had pulled everyone in. The statesman who oversaw this, the Kaiser in Berlin, the Tsar in St. Petersburg, the Emperor in Vienna, the officials in London and Paris were not mustache-twirling villains. They were tired, frightened men, trapped in the logic of their own systems. They were prisoners of the story they had been telling their nations for decades. As the German Chancellor, Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, would later say, it felt like a leap in the dark. They pulled the lever, and to their horror, the machine did not stop. And then the cheers. This is the most haunting, inexplicable, and essential fact of August 1914, the euphoria. In Berlin, a sea of people filled the Odeonsplatz, ecstatic. A young, unknown Austrian painter named Adolf Hitler was caught in a photograph, his face alight with joy. In Paris, crowds stormed down the Boulevard chanting à Berlin. In London, vast throngs gathered outside Buckingham Palace, singing God Save the King. In Vienna, they showered soldiers with flowers and cigars. This was not state-manufactured propaganda. This was a genuine, mass psychic eruption. After the long, materialistic peace, what many intellectuals decried as a shallow, boring, shopkeeper's age war, was greeted as a liberation, a purification, a return to heroism, sacrifice, and grand, collective meaning. It was a violent cure for the disease of modern ennui. The young men, the students, the poets, the clerks, the factory workers did not see death. They saw a great adventure. They rushed to enlist. Terrified the fighting would be over by Christmas before they could see action. In Britain, friends joined together in pals' battalions, promising to serve side by side. It was a social event, a test of masculinity, a romantic break from the mundane. The literature of the time captures this intoxicating, toxic romance. The English poet Rupert Brooke thanked God who has matched us with his hour, writing of combat as a swimmer into cleanness leaping. In Germany, intellectuals spoke of the Ideen von 1914, the superior German ideas of duty, order, and spirit, rising to cleanse the decadent, commercial ideas of 1789 from the French Revolution. They boarded trains draped in garlands, with slogans chalked on the carriages: Ausflug nach Paris, day trip to Paris. They kissed sweethearts goodbye and posed for photographs grinning. They were the last innocent army in human history. They carried in their packs and in their minds the entire world of the 19th century, its notions of chivalry, its belief in decisive battles, its sentimental patriotism. They were not traveling to a battlefield. They were marching, singing, into the open mouth of a brand new kind of hell. A hell their imaginations, shaped by Tennyson's cavalry charges and Wagner's heroic sagas, could not begin to conceive. For one final, fleeting month, the war moved. It was the last war of movement Europe would witness for 4 years, and in that month the 19th century died on its feet. The German juggernaut swept through Belgium, its path stained by atrocities born of paranoia about civilian francs-tireurs. The medieval library of Louvain was put to the torch, an act of cultural barbarism that shocked the world and cemented the image of the Hun. The French army committed to the mystical doctrine of Elan Vital. The unstoppable spirit of the offensive hurled itself in bayonet charges against German machine guns and artillery in Lorraine. The result was a catastrophe. In the first month of war, France suffered over 200,000 casualties. A generation was bleeding out in the sunny fields of the frontier. The small professional British Expeditionary Force met the German advance at Mons. Their rapid, disciplined rifle fire, the mad minute, was so intense the Germans believed they faced massed machine guns. But they were hopelessly outnumbered and began a long fighting retreat. The crisis culminated in early September, along the winding line of the River Marne northeast of Paris. The German swing was overextended, its commanders out of touch with their exhausted men. The French commander, General Joseph Joffre, stolid and imperturbable, rallied his broken armies. In a desperate, iconic gamble, every available taxi in Paris, some 600 Renault cabs, was commandeered. They shuttled 6,000 French reserves to the front in a bizarre, modern meets archaic shuttle service. The German advance was halted just 40 kilometers from the Eiffel Tower. The miracle of the Marne saved France, but it killed the Schlieffen Plan and any hope of a short, decisive war. Exhausted, bloodied, and realizing they could not outflank each other in the subsequent race to the sea, the opposing armies did the only thing left to do. They dug. First, they dug shallow scrapes for cover, then deeper holes, then connecting trenches, then support trenches, communication trenches, bunkers. Aerial photographs taken that autumn revealed a terrifying new geography. 2 parallel, serpentine lines of raw, brown earth now scarred the body of Europe. A 400 5-mile-long wound from the Swiss Alps to the dunes of the North Sea. The Western Front was not a front, it was a condition, a state of being. The tools and aesthetics of the old world vanished into its mud. The last great cavalry charge became a pathetic, suicidal anachronism. The French pantaloons rouges, the bright red trousers that had been a point of pride, were phased out, replaced by horizon blue, then by the universal, anonymous khaki and field grey. All the brilliant colours of the imperial uniforms, designed for pageantry and visibility, were swallowed by the monochrome of clay, blood and steel. The war of ideas, of movement, of national romance was over. What began now, in the autumn rains of 1914, was a war of matter, of physics and chemistry, of industrialized slaughter. It was a siege on a continental scale, where the besiegers and the besieged were mirror images, living in identical misery just a few hundred yards apart. separated by a tortured strip of earth called no man's land. By Christmas, a strange, quiet truth was dawning in the frozen trenches. This would not be over soon, and on that first Christmas something miraculous and subversive happened. In sectors along the line, the firing stopped. German soldiers began to sing Stille Nacht. British and French troops responded with carols of their own. Cautiously, men climbed from their trenches. They met in the frozen waste of no man's land. They exchanged cigarettes, chocolate, and uniform buttons. They showed photographs of families. In a few places, they even played a clumsy game of football with a tin can or a straw-stuffed ball. The Christmas truce was a fleeting, human spasm against the machine logic of the war. It was the common soldier, the pawn on the map, recognizing himself in the face of his supposed enemy. High command on both sides was horrified. Fraternization was a contagion that threatened the entire nationalist narrative. Orders were issued. Artillery was fired on schedule the next day to ensure it would not happen again. The human moment was suppressed. The machine, having stuttered, was recalibrated and restarted. The spontaneous peace was buried. The dictated war continued. And so the last summer faded. The world of 1914, the world of certainty, of gold-backed currencies, of gradual progress, of visible heroism and noble futures did not end with a bang. It ended with the soft, relentless sound of a shovel biting into cold, Flanders earth. It ended with men who had left as clerks and farmers and students now learning to burrow like animals. It ended with the realization that the magnificent clock had been telling the wrong time all along. The Great War did not begin in 1914. It ended something in 1940. It was the terminal point. The final, catastrophic working out of the 19th century's own logic, its faith in empire, in the machine, in the rational management of human destiny. That logic shattered against the simple, physical reality of the machine gun and the high explosive shell. The long, golden afternoon was over. The clockwork world had broken its mainspring. The men who had marched away in August did not just carry rifles. They carried libraries within them, the folk songs, the local dialects, the artisan skills, the unspoken social codes of 1,000 pre-industrial communities. They were the last living repositories of a planet that was about to vanish into the homogenizing global furnace of total war. What would crawl out of the trenches in 1918 would be different men. And they would return to a planet they no longer recognized. The first and most profound casualty of World War I was not a generation of youth. It was naivete itself. It was the death of the idea that history was a story of simple moral progress. That civilization was a permanent, ascending state. That technology was an unalloyed good. That the old maps and the old stories could guide you through the new, shapeless century that was being born in the mud in real time before their terrified eyes. The summer was gone, and with it, the world it had sustained. All that remained was the winter, and the long, slow learning of a terrible new truth, that the most advanced civilization in human history had built, not a paradise, but the precise, efficient machinery of its own nightmare. They cheered as they left, believing in a clean, heroic war, a romantic story their culture had told them for generations. What are the stories our culture tells us today with that same dangerous, unthinking certainty? Stories about technology, about progress, about destiny, about the other. What future are we cheering for without understanding the first thing about the real war that is coming?